an honour, and thank you for the very kind introduction. So my interest and my professorship has been in the area of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary. And this has been an opportunity to explore how, as creatives and artists, we can work together with a range of disciplines and a range of expertise to bring creativity through to the forefront of innovation. I particularly started this work when I worked at Oxford Brookes University and also at the Said Business School in the University of Oxford. And I became very, very interested in the application of creativity within transdisciplinary approaches for social entrepreneurship and social innovation. So I hope that this is of interest to those that are interested in interesting business models, in thought leadership, in change management, and particularly in rethinking the problems that we have to find creative, collaborative solutions. So what is STEAM pedagogy? So STEAM is really about developing and retaining innovation. And we have something called STEAM House at Birmingham City University, which we are very well known for in terms of not only our research and innovation approaches, but also how we teach our students and how we develop some of our areas of practice. So it's really an educational approach which uses science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics. And all those might seem very, very disparate and perhaps not overlapping or integrated in any way. Actually, when we start to think about the emerging needs of the world, this is absolutely where we feel we should be developing our graduates. And so this is really around developing inquiry and creative and critical thinkers. And that's using transdisciplinary approaches, which I'll explain a little bit more in a moment. And so this is to develop innovators and leaders and learners of the 21st century. And it embeds creativity and imagination as a powerful catalyst for innovation. So this is for the kind of creative application beyond just the art studio. And I think this model by Jen Sanhui really explains and summarizes the progression from interdisciplinary through to transdisciplinary. So we have a really interesting visual model here, which explores the many different terms that we often use when we're talking about collaborative working. But actually what we're really looking at here is looking at transdisciplinary. And how is that slightly different? Well, transdisciplinary is a crossover and beyond. And this is where we actually collaborate with those that perhaps are not necessarily from one particular discipline. And in fact, they may be from outside of the academic arena. So this may involve businesses, industry experts, ranging from engineers all the way through to business owners. So they may not necessarily be a researcher. They could actually be much more involved in business or indeed process or manufacturing. So it combines interdisciplinarity with participatory approach. And this research paradigm involves non-academic participants. But we see those non-academic participants as equal participants in the process to reach the common goal in terms of usually finding a solution to a problem which society has. That could be local, it could be regional, it could be national, or indeed it could be global. And I've had the great pleasure of working with many kind of, I would say, thought leaders who have really embraced this approach. Really, I suppose, picking up on the sense that complex problems require a complex set of disciplines to find a really creative solution. So I think it's the absolute definition of thinking outside of the box. So it can also be considered as a combination of those interdisciplinary efforts. And I think what happens with the transdisciplinary approach is that we will often be having industry partners, and in the STEAM House building, which I'll show you shortly, which is our second phase and development of this idea, It really allows students and researchers and businesses and developers from industry to be working together in a permeable space. So it is absolutely a kind of osmosis where this is a very kind of fluid space. It's very open. It's very much around seeing what others are doing and working alongside them. And actually that picks up on quite a lot of studio creative atelier approach, which is absolutely how studios work. So this is very much borrowed from the creative arts approach. So how can STEAM transdisciplinary pedagogy support new thinking towards social innovation? Well, first of all, what is social innovation? It develops new ideas to tackle social problems or meet social needs. And no more is there a time where this is perhaps completely applicable and appropriate and current in terms of a pandemic. There has been so much innovation which has grown out of this need to innovate collectively, where we've had to really embrace that interdisciplinarity. So where we've seen not just the idea of developing a vaccine, but how do you mobilize it? How do you logistically deliver, administer? How do you communicate within communities with a range of languages? How do you deal with the psychology of fear or perhaps the flow of people? So the kind of mass management of vaccination programs. And we've been involved with that at Birmingham University as well. So here we see, you know, health specialists, the armed forces, logistics experts, as well as medical professional staff and health specialists and researchers coming together to solve a significant problem. So it is very different from social entrepreneurship, though, in terms of it developing a core idea, whereas social entrepreneurship tends to look for a kind of a business model or an enterprise system. This is actually a systematic change. So it's very much more around process and developing, I would say, a kind of means to an end as opposed to a product. One of the really interesting aspects that I became very kind of intrigued with when I was working at the University of Oxford in partnership with colleagues from the Skoll Centre was this idea of apprenticing with the problem. And this idea was really started by the late Dr. Pamela Hartigan, who was an extraordinary disruptive thinker. And has written several books. And if you are interested in disruptive creative thinking for social innovation, then anything by Dr. Pamela Hartigan will be absolutely fascinating to you, particularly her book around the unreasonable social entrepreneur. And this idea of apprenticing with the problem is this sense that sometimes we move fast towards the solution. So we expect to solve something sometimes with speed. Perhaps we take a very direct route, whereas what Dr. Pamela Hartigan and what I was very interested in is the creative meander, where we talk about the exhausting of the idea. And artists do this in a very I suppose, playful way. So they explore, they experiment, they try things without knowing whether it's going to work. So that sense of learning, even without the barrier of failure, is one which is incredibly important with this concept of apprenticing with the problem. So it's really around learning about the problem before jumping in to try and solve it. So what does that mean? That means working with those who are experiencing the problem. So rather than assuming that you know what a particular community or group or region need, Actually, it's about understanding and apprenticing with that problem to really understand what it is they need. And what it is they want, rather than assuming. So there's often a collaborative process, which is quite similar to a creative exploration or unpacking of the problem to really understand it. And if you were looking at, say, for example, a pie diagram that might apportion time to this process, a significant amount of time, probably around 50% of the time, is spent on understanding the problem, apprenticing with it before even considering what the potential solutions might be. And also, it's very important, this is very much around the idea of design, where we look at existing precedents of design. So we look back and we look at what currently exists in terms of understanding what's already been done, what paths have already been trodden, in order to identify the solution gaps. So that's really about saying, well, yes, we have all of these solutions previously, but where are the solution gaps that have not yet been met? And so we often would practice something called the social innovation canvas, where we would start with this idea of these gaps between the current innovations and what would we be looking to fill on these kind of blank canvas spaces. It's a really interesting model, and you can find out more about that if you look up Pamela Hardigan. So why use a transdisciplinary approach for social innovation? Well, those that have researched this area, including REPCO, asserts that interdisciplinary function, instruction fosters advances in cognitive ability. So the idea of thinking through and developing ideas is something which comes from a transdisciplinary approach. Kowalski and Newell have identified a number of distinctive educational benefits of interdisciplinary learning, including gains in the ability to recognise bias and limitations of your own thinking and your own discipline. So this is about becoming much more open to different ways of thinking. We all come with our natural tendencies, which are further enforced, usually through our discipline expertise. It develops our ability to think critically, but also to tolerate ambiguity. So that sense of not always having the solution first at hand, and embracing that and understanding that actually working through towards